All right. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to my weekly Twitch stream. My name is Astrology, and we are, as usual, going to be looking at an astrology chart tonight. And this is the astrology chart of Ryan Gosling. Now, Ryan Gosling, as I'm sure many of you know, is an actor. He's well known for a number of roles. Recently, one of the favorite roles that I have seen him in is, of course, Project Hail Mary. But before that, he was also Ken in the Barbie movie, and I thought he did an outstanding job in that film as well. So tonight I have his chart up. We have a time chart for him, so we have a lot that we can dive into. If you have any questions during the stream, of course, please feel free to put them in the chat, and I will try to answer them as best I can. Okay, so let's get started. Of course, as usual, the first thing we're going to take a look at is the rising sign. So the rising sign in this case is Pisces. And remember that the rising sign is the way you look at the world, and it is also the way others see you. So when you have Pisces rising, you look through the world in such a way that it's very, very sensitive, and you are really feeling the energy of people around you. Hi, Wilted Flower, nice to have you aboard. Welcome. This particular configuration can be a little bit difficult in some ways because when you look at the world through the eyes of Pisces, it's an extremely sensitive and compassionate worldview, which is great for many, many things, but the sign of Pisces does have a tendency also to be taken in by a sob story, and they also tend to be a little bit self-sacrificing as well. So as you see someone through the eyes of Pisces, there is pretty much a lot of rose-colored glasses that you're going to experience. Hi, Ranger Jody. So glad you could make it. Welcome. Pisces rising people tend to look at the very subtle energy-related things of the world. And as such, when you're with a Pisces rising person, that's a pretty high compliment because most of the time, if you're a Pisces rising, you need to also have some alone time. This is true for Pisces sun and moon folks as well. Remember that the sign of Pisces is ruled by the planet Neptune. And we're going to talk about Neptune in a minute because he's going to be important here, of course. Remember that the planet that rules the rising sign in an astrology chart is called the ruling planet and typically has quite a bit of importance. So let's look at it. So our ruling planet is Neptune, and it's sitting in the 9th house. But let's talk about what Neptune's job is. Neptune's job is to show us how sensitive the world can be. Neptune's job is the boundless ocean, okay? Neptune deals with things like music and the arts and fantasy and intuition. For anyone who is acting, to have Pisces rising is pretty damn good because you already start with this mindset of I'm going to become someone else. I'm going to make other people believe that I'm someone else. And one of the small things I didn't mention was that the sign of Pisces has a motto, like they all do, and the motto of Pisces is, I believe. Again, that can pose some challenges because what you believe might not be true. And as we've talked about a few times on this channel, Neptune can throw some challenges our way because Neptune is the boundless ocean, and Neptune does have this tendency to obscure things. Neptune hides things. Neptune can put on those rose-colored glasses for you so you can think you're seeing one thing and you're really not. The challenge with Neptune is that we call him the great deceiver. And sometimes the deception is good. I mean, especially if we're talking about actors in movies, folks. You want to walk into a movie and sometimes you just want the fantasy. You don't want to think about reality, okay? You want to think about the fantasy. You want to enjoy the fantasy. That's the same role that if you're doing a stage show or you're attending a play, the costumes and the setting have such a large role in making the audience understand and go along with the fantasy, right? And so Neptune's job is very, very important, but the danger of Neptune is that he is not a planet that deals well with reality, okay? He's Mr. Sensitivity, but not reality. And so when you have a Pisces rising outlook, you really have to make sure you keep it real to not put too fine a point on it. You have to be anchored in reality because Neptune is also the planet of escape. In extreme cases, Neptune can be the planet of addiction. Many people who have a strong Neptune in their chart either have family members who are addicts or are addicts themselves, and that does tend to happen. So when we're looking at this, remember that the planet Neptune is a very powerful one, and for his occupation, it works exceptionally well. Now, for those of you who are interested in more classical rulerships, classical astrologers do not use Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, the outer planets, as ruling planets. So before Neptune was discovered in 1848, Jupiter was the ruling planet of Pisces. And so when we're looking at a Pisces rising chart, we want to take a look at both. In this particular case, we have Jupiter in Libra. So this is someone who wants to grow, but wants to grow with someone else. They want to grow in a very balanced way. Okay? And especially because in this case, we have Jupiter that happens to be in the 7th house of relationships. I'm guessing Ryan Gosling's growth is very much driven by other people. Okay? A one-to-one relationship. And it's funny, I think of the Barbie movie, right, where he's paired with someone else for mutual success. That's probably where he's going to do the best. Now, to be fair, I have seen Project Hail Mary. I'm not giving away any spoilers. I just think you should see it. It's an amazing film. But in that film, he carried it himself generally. Although at some points he did have someone on the screen with him as well. But I'm going to leave that alone so you can enjoy the movie. In any case, we have Jupiter in Libra here as well. Before I forget, we have Neptune in the 9th house. Likely, Ryan is very spiritual. That Neptune in the 9th house can indicate someone who is very interested in spiritual growth and spiritual depth. The 9th house often deals with anything that's spiritually related or philosophically related. So when we see Neptune there, we can often talk about someone's desire for spiritual growth. Okay. Okay. Now, as usual, before we move on, let's look at the elemental balance. Now, if you've been looking at some of the Twitch streams that I have been posting online, just now I've posted the most recent piece of the Taylor Swift stream that I did a couple of weeks ago. And that one, as a reminder, that one really was interesting because it had several singletons in it. Hey, One True Cripple, good evening, welcome. That one had several singletons in it. In this particular case, we do have one singleton in the chart, and it is an Earth singleton. Okay, a singleton is one planet that represents either a quality, cardinal, fixed, or mutable, or one particular element, and it's the only one in the chart. And so it gets a lot of attention. So where's our Earth planet in this chart? Well, it happens to be the moon in Capricorn, up here in the 11th house. Now, since we're here, let's talk about the moon in Capricorn. The moon in Capricorn is a challenging moon placement. Remember that the moon's job is our emotional, our emotional body. Okay, the whole range of our emotions. The moon also is what I call crisis mode, which means what's going to happen if there's some kind of incident in your life. What's the knee-jerk reaction? That's your moon. Mom is your moon, so your relationship with your mom, how you nurture people, sleep patterns, eating patterns, all of those are connected to the moon, as is our childhood. Okay. Mr. Gosling's chart is very interesting to me also because I am a Capricorn moon as well. Capricorn moon is what we call the moon in detriment because it is in the opposite sign of the most powerful sign that this planet could have. The moon resonates with Cancer. The moon rules, powers, if you will, the sign of Cancer. Well, Capricorn's the opposite sign, folks. And so for those of us with the moon in Capricorn, we start kind of 2 lengths behind everybody else. Now, as you've heard me say on this channel before, planets in detriment are not a problem because you have the opportunity to work on them. It's when you lean on them too hard and you don't work on them that there's a problem. But let's talk about the moon in Capricorn. I call the moon in Capricorn Hoover Dam, ladies and gentlemen, because the emotion of the moon is like a river. Hoover Dam blocks the emotion. So when you have the moon in Capricorn, you tend to suppress emotion. You don't want to show it. I like to think of the British military stiff upper lip. You could be in tremendous amount of pain, but you don't want to show anyone that you're in pain. You could be feeling emotionally overwhelmed, but you don't want anyone to see it. Okay, because you feel like that would be a sign of weakness. Now, with the Capricorn moon, if you don't allow some, like a dam, some of the emotion out every once in a while, in other words, if you don't have people who are a safe space for you to let out that emotion, or another outlet where you can get it out somehow, the dam's going to break, and you're going to have an emotional shutdown or an emotional breakdown, or you're going to show that emotion at a place and time that you didn't pick. Okay? And so one of the things that you can see in this chart already is that this is someone who could have a rather serious demeanor, and someone who may, at least as a child, may have struggled with making connections on an emotional level. I know for me, I definitely did. When I was a kid, I was extremely boring. Okay? I didn't do much of anything. I towed the line, didn't want to get into trouble. The moon in Capricorn is all those things. And remember, in your life, your job is to grow from moon into sun. And so Ryan Gosling started off with a Capricorn moon. And ideally, you develop into your sun from your moon. Again, the challenge is if you sit there with a bad planet and say, well, I'm going to blame that for all the problems I have. That's when you run into trouble. Okay? And honestly, that's one of my biggest astrology pet peeves is when people look at their chart and say, oh, I'm supposed to act this way because my chart says so. No, the chart is where you start. You decide where you finish, ladies and gentlemen. Your astrology chart does not tell you how to behave. It is a set of tendencies. It's the astrological hand you've been dealt. You still get to choose how to play it. Okay? So we have the one Earth element planet in this chart as the moon. As such, it's going to get a lot of attention because it's the only Earth sign planet. When you only have one Earth planet, folks, you might struggle with resource management. Time, money, energy, trust, any of those things, you may struggle with those. And also, you may seek out people, partners, friends, romantic involvements, where there's Earth in that other person's chart. And of course, you don't always know, but you may gravitate toward earthy people for that reason. Now, one of the most interesting characteristics of this chart is not something that we've looked at on this channel before. So let's take a look. There are certain configurations, we call them, of the astrological planets. But let me go back for 1 second. Whenever I do a chart for somebody who hasn't seen their chart before, when they ask me to work on it with them, one of the questions they often have is, why are there places in my chart that are completely open and all of my planets tend to cluster in one place? Well, one of the reasons for that is because when you're dealing with the sun, there are certain planets that can't go too far from the sun. One is Mercury and one is Venus. So you will often find the sun conjunct Mercury or conjunct Venus, or all three of them together in a stellium, not far from each other. That happens often. And so you may find that it seems like things are all clustered. And of course, there are clusters of other planets too. But there are certain astrological configurations where we see the planets laid up in a certain way, and it gives us extra hints. This is the chart of Ryan Gosling, One True Cripple. And so when we're doing a chart, if one of those configurations comes up, it's important to mention it. Now, I've got to be honest. Most people do not have a chart configuration. There are 9 or 10 generally accepted chart configurations. And if your chart doesn't have one, that's okay. Some charts do. Some charts, like Muhammad Ali's chart, for example, has several different configurations that it could possibly be. And astrologers love to argue over which one it is. Okay? But I want to show you how this manifests in the chart. So take a look. I'm going to close in. And I'm going to make a line that shows where all the planets are. So this chart has all of the planets within 120 degrees. Okay? To have all of them in that tight of an area is a big deal. And we actually have a word for this. We actually call this chart a bundle. When all the planets are within 120 degrees, when they're all clustered in one area of the chart, we call that a bundle. Now, the bundle is something that is important to point out, because the bundle brings a focus to the personality. Okay? It really does. It makes this person very intense. It makes them very focused. It can make them very specialized. On the negative side, it can also make people very obsessive. Okay? And because this person's energy is so focused in one area of the chart, other areas of the life may not get the attention they need. Just how it happens. But as you can see, the focus of this chart is very much here, right? We have 5 planets in the 7th house. We have 2 more in the 8th, 2 more in the 9th, and 1 over here in the 11th. Okay? So this is a person who is very, very focused and specialized. And it doesn't mean that the person only has one set of talents, but it means that likely they're going to have a singular focus in life. And luckily with Ryan Gosling, we pretty much know what that is. Okay? But this is a bundle chart. As we do more charts and we get more comfortable with talking about them, I will make sure that if there are any chart configurations, I mention them, because there are 9 or 10 of them. There's the bucket, there's the wedge, there's the locomotive, there's the splash. They have all kinds of different names, and they all represent different configurations of the planets in a chart. Okay? But this one is the bundle. So here you go. All right, as we continue our astrological journey this evening, we go to the sun next. And here we have the sun in the 8th house in Scorpio. Now, I swear to you, when I picked Ryan Gosling's chart, I had no idea his chart and mine were going to be very similar. But I'm also Scorpio, Sun, Capricorn, Moon. We have plenty of other differences, but it's interesting that this chart and mine are similar in some ways. The sun, the sign of Scorpio, is one that is very intense and focused already. Okay? Scorpio, the old saying about Scorpio is that we have 1 foot in heaven and 1 foot in hell, which is probably true. Scorpio is a sign that does tend to be extreme. Folks, we're either pretty much in or we're out. We don't really half-ass anything. We go 1,000% or 0%, generally. One of the biggest things that Scorpios are known for on the negative side is actually revenge. It's one of the more challenging emotions that we have to work with, because we never ever want to get taken advantage of without getting someone back. And as kids, that's one of the things that we have to make sure that we learn well, is that revenge is just not worth it. We end up cutting off our nose to spite our face when we do it. On the positive side, you are not going to find a more passionate sign than Scorpio. There is a drive in Scorpio that is unrelenting. If you put them in a situation where they are doing something that they are passionate about, then you're going to be very pleased, because they're going to be a success. As long as they have the focus, they're going to have the success. And honestly, Scorpio is a sign that has more willpower than any other sign of the zodiac, folks. Scorpio is many things. Willpower is that. We have that in spades. Now, of course, there are many other things we don't have. We're not always particularly good at being sympathetic. We're a little bit obsessive. We have a tendency to see things as black and white. All those things are Scorpio traits as well. But one of the other interesting parts of this chart, in addition to having the Scorpio sun, is that it's in the 8th house. Scorpio is very comfortable in that house. And I'll tell you why. Because the sign of Scorpio deals with a lot of the 8th house topics. So if you're not familiar with the 8th house is about the unconscious, the things that we don't think about. The 8th house deals with what I call the inevitables of life. Death, birth, rebirth, sex, taxes, other people's money, inheritances. Remember that this house is the helping and healing house also. So if Ryan Gosling hadn't been an actor, I could have easily seen him going into a caring profession where he was working with people daily. Especially because the 8th house also deals with therapy, psychology, and psychiatry. So I could see him being very interested in knowing what makes people tick. Now, generally speaking, as Scorpios, we all kind of are interested in what makes people tick. And so with this placement in the 8th house, it gives him an even more serious look at life. Now, we've talked a little bit before about planets that don't have any aspects, right? In particular, a couple weeks ago when we did Taylor Swift's chart, we talked about the fact that her Sagittarius sun doesn't have any aspects to it. For Ryan Gosling, we don't have that situation, but we do have one strong connection, which is Uranus. So when you have another planet that's within 7 degrees of another, you will have what's called a conjunction. The energies of the planets blend. Okay. When you're talking about Uranus, as we've said before, Uranus is a planet that thrives on stimulation. Uranus is a planet that doesn't want stagnant energy. If something is not working, then Uranus has a tendency to break it so that we have to pay attention to it. Uranus is constantly moving electricity. Okay? There are things in the world that just come at us from left field. Likely Uranus is involved in that. Uranus is the planet of the unconventional. Uranus wants us to be different, unique. Uranus is the planet of anything related to LGBTQ+. Anyone who is not your standard run-of-the-mill person. Anyone who is different. Uranus is the planet that really comes to the fore. And more in people's charts, as we evolve, there's an even stronger influence of Uranus in people's day-to-day charts. When you see Uranus next to the sun is the life force. It means that for us, those of us who have it, I do not, but for people who have it, Ryan Gosling likely is on the move a lot. I could not see Ryan Gosling sitting in an office for 8 hours a day. That probably would not work really well for him. I could see him doing any kind of profession that involved death, because with the, oh, hi, Rebecca, nice to have you aboard. I could see him doing something really unconventional involving death, like forensics, especially because Uranus is the planet that deals with anything that is cutting edge and technology. So the fact that he has Sun Uranus is really interesting there. And likely he's somebody who likes his tech. Usually when you have Sun Uranus, these are people who want to be early adopters. Sun Uranus people also have a tendency to be progressive. They want equality for everyone. That's what Uranus wants. Uranus wants to shake things up so that everybody's on an equal playing field. And one of the most interesting parts of Uranus has to do with his most recent movie. Uranus is the planet of space exploration. And for someone to do a movie about space exploration and have Sun Uranus is perfect. It's right on. He probably felt very comfortable with the subject matter of this movie. And from what I read, he's doing another space-related project later this year. And so a lot of times when you see Uranus, you can expect the unconventional. Expect someone to be unique. He definitely is a unique person. You can see it come out in some of his roles. You know, when he played Ken in the Barbie movie, he leaned into that Pisces rising, that very passive kind of outlook, at least until the end. Okay? And so you can see when people are doing movies, their charts will definitely come out. You'll see different pieces of it. But when you have Sun Uranus, likely you're not going to want to sit down. You're going to want to be different. You're going to want to be cutting edge, and you're going to want people to see you as unique. In this case, because it's in the 8th house, he also has a tremendous interest in how people think, how they work, as well as helping people. Okay. So we've talked about Sun and Moon and a few other placements, like Uranus. So let's talk about Mercury next. And we have Mercury in Scorpio. Again, another placement I share with Mr. Gosling. When you've got Mercury in Scorpio, folks, you want to peel off all the onion layers. You want to get down to the nitty-gritty. You don't want to talk to people about what they had for lunch. You want to talk to people about what they think happens when they die. You're going to want to talk to people about their very serious views, how they look at life, what is important to them. Okay? You also don't take answers at face value. And you're always wondering what the agenda is. In other words, when people say things to you, Mercury in Scorpio kind of goes, okay, why would he say that? Why would she say that to me? And so we often will analyze how people communicate or not. This includes your verbal and nonverbal communication. And we love to dig. You know, people will joke that they're really good researchers online, that they can find anything online. Mercury in Scorpio has that naturally. So we have someone here who, when they speak, people take them seriously. Mercury in Scorpio tends to have that effect. He might not talk as much as other people would like him to, but when he does, people pay attention. Now, in this particular case, we do have an unaspected planet, and it is Mercury. Mercury does not have any connections in the natal chart. Now, we've talked about this a little when it comes to the sun, especially with Taylor Swift. But Mercury unaspected means that Mercury has a lot of room to do what it wants. Now, what makes Mercury unaspected even more significant is because it has to stay within 28 degrees of the sun. So the chances of it being unaspected are extremely low. You are not going to find many people with Mercury unaspected for that reason. Okay? So in addition to having that penetrative, researching, deep mindset, Mercury is even more powerful in this chart. This doesn't necessarily mean that you pick up things more quickly. It means that you're prepared to dig to find the information. Mercury unaspected also can give a tendency toward nervous system disorders because Mercury rules the nervous system. So we're talking about things like anxiety, we're talking about racing thoughts, we're talking about insomnia, okay? And person with Mercury unaspected might not have those things often, but when they do, they're really bad, okay? But with Mercury unaspected, this is someone for whom communication is exceptionally important. Now, where's it sitting? Well, it's sitting right at the edge of the 7th house. The 7th house, ladies and gentlemen, deals with relationships of all kinds. I like to call this the house of one-on-one relationships. This is not just marriages. Okay, a lot of people say, oh, that's the marriage house. Well, it is, but it's a lot more than that. It's one-to-one friendships. It's one-to-one relationships of any kind, and that includes business partnerships. Okay. When we're looking at court cases, the 7th house represents your opponent. Okay, whoever you're facing in court, if you ever have to face someone in court, the 7th house is that. The 7th house also represents any service providers that you have a one-to-one relationship with, your financial advisor, your accountant, your mechanic, your hairstylist, your astrologer. One of the things that I will do when I'm seeing a client for the first time is focus on the 7th house, because I'm looking at what my relationship is going to be like to that person. What are they going to expect from me? How is this going to go? A lot of times when I look at the 7th house, I have an idea. When we have Mercury in the 7th, it means that communication with other people, especially intimate partners, close friends, and business partners, is going to be exceptionally important to Mr. Gosling. Those things are going to be vital for him. Now, earlier I mentioned that because of the wedge nature of this chart, it's called a wedge or a bundle, folks. Either one works, but in this case, we called it a bundle, so we'll stick with that. The bundle chart is focused on this quadrant of the chart that we have in the view right now. But 5 of these planets are in the 7th house. And there's a lot going on in that 7th house. And the way that I would break this up is I would say, okay, these two, Jupiter and Saturn conjunct, which we'll talk about. We have Pluto, Venus conjunct. And then, of course, we have the unaspected Mercury, which we talked about. But this person, Ryan, has a packed 7th house. Meaning that for him, the other people that he brings into his life are exceptionally important. Okay? Anyone who he associates with is going to be important for him. And likely this was a lesson he learned early on. What I find really interesting about his upbringing, I did a little bit of research, his upbringing talked about an incident when he was in high school, where he would, to impress girls, he would beat up other guys. Okay, and that's something that's on the record. What is interesting is that we have Venus and Pluto together, conjunct. So Venus is the planet of women, and Pluto represents power. So in his mind, to be good with women, you had to be powerful or show that you were powerful. And again, we often will see that people's lives show things in their chart. I didn't know that about him until today, but I knew he had a Venus-Pluto conjunction. So you can often see how some of these chart elements manifest in a person's life. That's one of the more obvious ones. Okay? But let's go back to this first pair of Jupiter and Saturn. Okay, Jupiter and Saturn are conjunct about once every 20 years, ladies and gentlemen. We call that the Great Conjunction. Okay? It doesn't happen often, because these two planets are both pretty far out. But when Ryan Gosling was born, these two planets were almost on top of each other. This is a legit conjunction, folks. This is about 3 degrees. Jupiter's job is expansion. Saturn's job is boundaries, and it does have some restrictions. And so when you see a 7th house with these two planets sitting right next to each other, which is pretty rare, you have to ask yourself what the relationship development was like in this person's life. Okay? There's a strong desire to grow, but again, it's growth in a balanced context because Jupiter is in Libra. But Saturn in Libra, honestly, is even better. Saturn in Libra has really good boundaries. It's a planet that's focused on being disciplined, but not going crazy about it. And it's sitting in the 7th house of relationships. This is a pretty good planet, and it's in a good spot for him because relationships are so important to him that to have that Saturn in Libra there saying, this is what's important to me, this is how I have to discipline myself, this is all good. This is a really great placement. Saturn in Libra, wherever you see it, is good, but especially for Ryan Gosling, he got a really nice Saturn in Libra in his chart. And that definitely helps him not take relationships too seriously. Then we move up to the next pair. We have Venus and Pluto conjunct. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to talk about Venus alone for a minute. Because Venus is a planet. Oh, I can't draw a star tonight. Oh, there we go. That's a little better. Venus in Libra is very strong. Venus in Libra is a planet in rulership. Venus powers the sign of Libra. And so when Venus is in Libra, Venus is very powerful and very happy. This is good overall for relationships, especially for him, relationships with women, because Venus is the planet of women. And so as we look at this, we can see that Venus is going to have a very strong influence in his life. One other interesting thing about Venus in Libra. So when Venus is in rulership, in this case in Libra, but it could also be in Taurus. Venus is the planet of sweetness, which is sugars. People with a strong Venus often do well with cooking or baking. I actually have a client who's a chef, and he has a similar setup. I have another client who used to live overseas and would make American desserts overseas, and they used to call her the Pie Queen of Tokyo. Okay, and she has that very strong Venus in Libra. Okay, so when I saw this chart at first, I thought, don't know, not sure what he's into. We'll take a look. It turns out that Ryan Gosling owns a Moroccan restaurant in LA. Now, he doesn't just own it. He actually runs it and picks the menu for it. You can't have a better example of Venus in Libra than that. Food is really love for Venus and Libra people. It's important to them. When they host, they want to host well. They want to feed you good food. A lot of people with Venus and Libra also make great foodies themselves. Food critics, wine critics. But it's really interesting that I saw that he has Venus in Libra and he runs this restaurant. According to the article, he poured all his money into it and he just loves it, but he runs it himself. When we pair Venus with Pluto, that's where we start getting a much more powerful combination, because Pluto is our power core. Pluto says, hey, this is where we're going to be able to really, really empower ourselves. And it also, in Ryan Gosling's case, highlights the importance of women in his life. And in one of the articles I read, there was a part of his upbringing where he actually said to his mother, I now know how it feels to be a woman. Like, he had all of these experiences that were very Venus related. Again, because Pluto is in the mix, they were very powerful. So women as a whole are going to be very important for him, just generally. Pluto in the 7th also can indicate the need to be careful with relationships, because Pluto is about power dynamics in relationships. Who's more powerful? Who's less powerful? Who's in control? Those are all Pluto questions. Well, when you have Pluto right next to Venus in the 7th house, you have to be very aware of the power balance in any relationship that you are in. Like I said, intimate, friendship, or business partnership. Okay? Those are important. So, one of the takeaways from tonight is going to be how much Ryan Gosling's life is determined by his relationships with other people. A lot more than most people, folks. I mean, that's half of his planets sitting in the 7th house. Now, as I've said before, all of the houses have 80 or 90 different keywords or concepts that you could talk about. And I don't want to spend too much time on that tonight, but if you're more interested, please definitely look up the 7th house online. They'll give you a lot of the keywords that you can think of, but they all really involve relationships and working with other people, in some cases, other people as the opponent, because the 7th house, in addition to representing opponents in court, it also represents what we call open enemies, those people who you're like, oh God, I hate him. That's the 7th house also. In addition to people we're super close to, it can also represent people that everyone knows we can't stand. So, you might not have known that about the 7th house, but, you know, hashtag the more you know. Okay. Now, one other set of planets we haven't talked about at all are these two. Now, we have talked about Neptune, to be fair, in the context of it being the chart ruler. But earlier we talked about how Neptune can obscure and Neptune can hide things. Well, this conjunction, ladies and gentlemen, is quite tight. Okay, it's less than 2 degrees. The smaller the distance between the planets, the more impact we're going to see in the life of the person. Mars is here in Sagittarius. Mars in Sagittarius is very expansive. They want to get out there and fight battles, but they want to fight battles on a philosophical level. They want to tell you about what their beliefs are. Their beliefs, their moral code motivates them. Earlier, I was talking about how Ryan Gosling would beat up guys in high school to get attention from women. Well, when I looked at this chart initially and I saw Mars right here, I was rather surprised. Because Mars is right next to, about 1.5 degrees from the midheaven. The midheaven is the career line. So we will often see people who are very athletic and or use their bodies in their jobs with Mars in that place. We will often see that. So again, I was kind of taken aback when I saw it. But then I read some more about how much Ryan Gosling enjoys being an action hero. He enjoys films where he's the action hero. Not a surprise. Mars right near the midheaven. But with Neptune next door, the effect is going to be a little bit muted, folks. Because remember that Neptune obscures and can really disguise the way, hide things. So when we see Mars, the planet of motivation, next to Neptune, we see a couple of things. One, we see someone who might have trouble getting motivated, simply because Neptune says, you don't need to, you can defer. Neptune's the planet of escape, right? When Mars says, hey, I want to get this stuff done, remember that Mars is the dumb jock of the astrology world, okay? He's the guy who wants to get your list of stuff done. And Neptune's going, you don't have to do that today. You can do that tomorrow. You can just defer. Well, that's one way of thinking about it. Another way of thinking about it is showing what Mars is motivated to do. And remember that Neptune is a planet that is very strong in the charts of anyone who's creative, including actors. And so the Mars conjunct Neptune here can indicate a strong desire to play different roles. One of the things that Neptune does well, folks, is costumes. So we can definitely see the possibility of this enhancing his career, especially given that both of them are not far from the midheaven. I would also consider Neptune to be conjunct the midheaven. It's within 5 degrees. So as we consider what these planets do and how they interrelate, there's always going to be positive stuff and there's always going to be negative stuff. In this case, it seems like Ryan Gosling is really using this Mars-Neptune conjunction in his career. And yeah, he likes action heroes. Okay, he likes being one. Not a surprise. What does he like to do? Mars, that's action. Neptune is playing a role. As far as I'm concerned, one of the best movies he did was The Fall Guy. It didn't get a lot of critical success, but I enjoyed that movie very much. I thought it was one of his best. And that's the perfect kind of role for him. The fact that he enjoys it isn't really a surprise at all. All right, we have a few minutes left, so let's take a look at some of the other parts of the chart. Let's look at the nodes. So we have the north node of the moon and the south node of the moon. The south node, as you may recall, is a place where we are comfortable and need to push away from, okay, to grow. Interestingly enough, the 12th house is the place where we hide things. His south node is there. The 12th house is also extreme sensitivity, and his south node is there. And with Pisces rising, that would just add to the effect. So he's likely an extremely sensitive person. But the 12th house is not the place for him to stay. In other words, this isn't someone who I would say, hey, you really need to develop your intuition. No, his intuition's probably pretty good. He might even depend on it too much. The place to develop for Ryan Gosling is here in the 6th house. It's the north node in Leo. Interestingly enough, Leo is the sign of celebrity. And the 6th house represents day-to-day work and health and wellness. So if I had him in front of me, one of the first things I would say to him is, hey, make sure you're doing cardio, because Leo rules the heart. That will be very helpful for him. I'm sure he has no trouble staying in shape, but that's one of the things I would say if he was not a celebrity. But I would also say that one of his goals is developing his own ego, for him to be a strong person, and for him to develop it through the 6th house, which not only is day-to-day work, but is the mind-body connection. I would recommend for him to do anything that would help his confidence and his self-esteem through a mind-body connection modality. Meditation, energy work, something like that. Okay? The 6th house also represents household animals. So as I went through the articles, I didn't see anything about him being an animal lover. But I would definitely recommend household animals for him. They'll help him grow as well. Okay. Obviously, with a chart, ladies and gentlemen, there is always more to talk about. But we are almost out of time, so if anyone has any questions, I am happy to take them. Okay. Well, hearing nothing, I want to thank you so much for joining me for the stream tonight. Next week, I'm going to be looking at the 2 charts from the actors on Heated Rivalry. So I will be looking at them, Hudson Williams and Connor Story. I have not looked at their charts yet, so I don't know if they're timed or not. But I'd like to spend a little bit of time on each one. Again, if they're not timed, that actually just makes it a little easier because we'll have less to talk about. But that's a show that has pretty much taken the world by storm. And I think it's really interesting to take a look at the 2 people who play the main characters there. As always, if you have other suggestions on people you'd like to see on the channel, always happy to do that. And if anyone is brave enough, I am always happy to do someone's personal chart up here. That would require some serious bravery and a discussion beforehand about what you would like me to discuss and not in front of a live audience, but I don't have any trouble doing that. So if that's something that interests you, send me a DM and we'll talk. Anyway, once again, I'm so grateful for you spending your time with me this evening. I look forward to seeing you again. I'm going to look and check my calendar. I may be busy next Tuesday night, but I will let you know when the next stream is in any case. So, thank you so much, everybody. Have a great night.